The town lived between two worlds, where dust from old roads rose to meet the dreams of those chasing a better life. Morning sunlight touched both the modern shops and the worn paths where tradition still held its ground. Street vendors called out their goods while elders sat nearby, watching silently, as if reading the stories of everyone who passed. In this place, old beliefs whispered through the noise of progress, reminding people that no one escapes their roots forever. Among those who moved through this town was a man known for his wealth and fearsome reputation. He was a billionaire, a man built from gold and stone, whose presence made others lower their voices. People did not greet him with warmth, but with caution. "He is not a man you cross," they said. "He decides, and his decisions do not bend." Yet behind his power was a cold silence, as if something human inside him had been locked away for years. Far from public eyes, there was a part of him he never spoke about, a forgotten village, a childhood filled with simple laughter, and a mother's voice calling him home. But he buried those memories under layers of ambition. Still, at times, when the night was too quiet, his thoughts would drift back to red earth paths and the smell of food cooked over open fire. He would clench his fists and whisper, "That life is gone." But the heart never fully forgets what it once loved. On the edge of the busy street stood a young food seller, her stall simple but alive with warmth. She cooked with patience, as if each meal carried the prayers of those who came before her. Her recipes were not just instructions, they were inheritance. As she stirred her pots, she would quietly say, "Ancestors of my home, guide my hands so no one leaves here hungry." Her cooking was not business alone, it was memory served with every plate. Each dish she prepared carried something deeper than taste. It carried the spirit of women who came before her, mothers who cooked not for wealth, but for love and survival. People who ate her food often paused without knowing why, as if something inside them had been gently touched. An old man once said, "This food does not fill the stomach only, it speaks to the soul." She only smiled and kept working, believing she was continuing a line that must never break. But life was not easy for her. Every day she stood under the harsh sun, serving people who sometimes looked at her as if she was less than them. She fed her younger siblings with what she earned, carrying responsibility far heavier than her age. Some in the community mocked her, saying she should leave the streets and find a rich man instead of cooking like this. But she would straighten her back and reply, "A tree that forgets its soil will fall when the wind rises." Around her, voices of judgment never rested. Elders spoke in warnings, neighbors whispered opinions, and gossip traveled faster than the wind. "She is wasting her youth," some said. "She should choose comfort over struggle." Others warned her that dignity without wealth was a dangerous path. But she only listened with quiet patience, as if she had already made peace with her fate. In her heart, she believed that true worth was not decided by money, but by the strength to remain true to one's roots, even when the world tries to pull them away. Between power and pride on one side, and humility and tradition on the other, stood a quiet town where both worlds breathed the same air but never truly understood each other. The elders would say, "When the river of pride meets the river of earth, one must learn to soften or it will lose its path." In this town, destiny was already stirring, waiting for a moment where the two worlds would finally collide without warning. A wealthy man passed through in his black car, his presence heavier than the dust outside. He was known across cities as a man of iron decisions, a billionaire whose name made people lower their voices. Yet inside him lived a silence he never spoke about, a cold emptiness he buried under success. As they drove past a roadside stall, something unusual happened. His eyes stayed a little longer than they should have. The driver said softly, "Sir, shall we continue?" But after a pause, he replied, "Stop." Even he did not know why. He stepped out slowly, as though the ground itself was unfamiliar. At the stall, a young woman looked up and greeted him with calm respect. "You are welcome, sir. What can I serve you?" she asked. He looked at the food, then at her, and said simply, "Give me what others are eating." She nodded and placed a warm plate before him. "Eat slowly," she said gently. "Food remembers the hands that made it." He did not understand her words, but he sat down anyway. The first bite silenced the world around him. The noise of the town faded, the movement of people blurred, and something deep inside him began to stir. It was not just taste, it was memory. Suddenly, he was no longer a powerful man in a suit, but a boy sitting near a fire. A soft voice came from the past, his mother's voice, saying, "A home is not measured by gold, but by the love served in it." His hand trembled slightly as he whispered, "This taste. I have felt it before." The young woman noticed his silence but said nothing. She had learned that some memories speak louder than words. He continued eating slowly, as if each bite was pulling him deeper into a forgotten world. "My mother used to cook like this," he finally said, almost to himself. She replied softly, "Then your roots have not died. They are only waiting for you to return to them." Those words settled inside him like a stone dropped into still water, creating ripples he could not stop. Something inside him cracked quietly, not like breaking glass, but like stone slowly giving way under rain. It was invisible to anyone watching, but inside him a shift had begun. He finished the meal in silence, yet he did not stand immediately. It was as if leaving would mean losing something he had just rediscovered but could not name. When he finally paid, he paused and said, "Thank you." She answered, "May your heart find what your wealth could not give you." He walked away, but the silence inside him was no longer empty, it was restless. Days passed, yet the memory of that taste refused to leave him. One morning, without explanation, he said to his driver, "Take me back there." The driver hesitated. "The roadside place, sir?" he asked in disbelief. "Yes," he replied firmly. And so he returned again, not because he needed food, but because something inside him was now hungry for something deeper than he had ever known. Each visit after that came wrapped in excuses. "I was passing by. I had business nearby. It is on the route." But deep inside, he knew these words were like wind, temporary and empty. Every time he sat at that stall, he was not just eating food, he was feeding a part of himself he had abandoned long ago. And slowly, without anyone noticing, a man once made of stone began carrying something fragile in his chest, something that felt dangerously close to feeling again. She was a girl who saw no crown on any head, not even on those who carried wealth or walked with pride. To her, every person who came to her fire was just another soul seeking warmth and food. When the billionaire sat at her stall, she did not bow differently or change her voice. "What would you like today?" she asked calmly, as if he were no different from the poorest man who came before him. He looked at her, slightly unsettled by her ease, and replied, "Serve me what you think I need." She only nodded and turned back to her pot, as if destiny itself had not just spoken. Her hands moved with quiet strength, steady as the rhythm of an old drum. She did not rush, even when customers grew impatient or when wealthier people looked down on her. There was something in her silence, something firm, like roots gripping deep into the earth during a storm. An old woman nearby once said, "That girl does not bow because she knows her worth is not tied to what others carry in their pockets." Even when mocked or ignored, she continued her work with dignity, as if her ancestors stood behind her, guiding every movement. As they shared meals across different days, the man began asking questions he never thought he would ask. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" he said one afternoon. She replied softly, "From the women before me. My mother, and her mother, and the fire that never dies in our home." He watched her carefully. "And you are not tired of this life?" She paused, then said, "A tree does not get tired of standing where its roots are." Her words struck him strangely, as if they were not just answers, but keys unlocking doors inside him he had sealed long ago. "Tell me about your family," he asked again another day, his voice lower now, less commanding. She stirred the pot before speaking. "We do not have much, but we have each other. My mother says even hunger becomes lighter when shared." At that moment, something in him shifted. He remembered a small kitchen, laughter, and a woman's voice telling him the same thing once. He looked away quickly, hiding the emotion rising in his chest. "Strange," he muttered. But she only continued cooking, unaware that her simple words were walking through his buried memories like ghosts returning home. Around them, the market began to notice. At first it was small things, longer glances, quieter conversations when he arrived, children pointing before being pulled away by their parents. "Do you see how he always sits there now?" one vendor whispered. Another replied, "A man like that does not come for food alone." The air itself seemed to carry curiosity, as if the market had begun to sense a story forming where none had existed before. Yet the girl remained the same, and the man returned more often than he admitted even to himself. Soon, gossip spread like fire through dry grass. The billionaire at a roadside stall. Some laughed in disbelief. He must be playing a game. Others said, she is aiming too high. The story grew larger with every retelling, twisting between admiration and suspicion. In every corner of the town, people spoke of them as if they already understood a story still being written. But truth was quieter than gossip, and it was unfolding slowly between steam, fire, and shared silence. Then came the woman in silk. She arrived like a storm wrapped in beauty and authority. Her shoes did not touch the dust the same way others did, and her eyes carried the sharpness of someone used to being obeyed. She was powerful, respected in elite circles, and closely tied to the billionaire's world of wealth. When she saw him sitting at the stall again, her expression changed, not with curiosity, but with warning. "So this is where you disappear to," she said coldly. The billionaire stood slightly surprised. "It is nothing," he replied. But she looked past him, toward the girl, and her voice dropped into something sharper. "Be careful," she said quietly, though it sounded more like a threat than advice. "Some distractions cost more than they appear." The air around them grew heavy, as if even the fire had gone silent to listen. A clash began to grow quietly between two worlds that were never meant to meet so easily. One world wore gold-plated expectations, polished words, and rules written by wealth. The other walked barefoot on truth, where dignity was not measured in money but in how a person carried their soul through struggle. When the billionaire sat again at the roadside stall, silence followed him like a shadow, while the young woman continued cooking as if status itself meant nothing under her fire. The air between them felt heavier, as if the earth was waiting to see which world would bend first. Inside the circles of the elite, whispers began to rise. Men and women who shared his world spoke carefully, but their words carried pressure like sharpened stones. "A man like him must not be seen too long in places like that," one advisor said. Another added, "He is drifting from his path. Power must be protected, not distracted by soft emotions." A close associate warned him directly, "You are building a name that controls cities. Do not lose it over a roadside connection." The billionaire listened in silence, but for the first time, their voices did not feel like guidance, only chains. Far from glass towers and polished tables, elders in the town spoke in a different tone. Sitting under the shade of an old tree, they shook their heads as they remembered stories of the past. "We have seen this before," one elder said slowly. "Men of great wealth come with smiles, but leave behind wounds that take generations to heal." Another elder replied, "A heart that is taken lightly by power becomes a broken drum in the village." Their warnings were not angry, but heavy with memory, as if history itself was speaking through them, trying to protect what once had been lost. In her small world, the young woman lived under watchful eyes. Neighbors observed her more closely now, as if her life had suddenly become a question everyone wanted answered. "Why does she speak to him so calmly?" one woman asked. Another murmured, "Does she not know her place?" Even her own relatives began to worry. Her aunt pulled her aside one evening and said, "A girl must be careful when her path starts attracting powerful footsteps. Wealth can look like blessing but carry hidden storms." The girl only lowered her eyes and replied, "I am not chasing storms, Auntie. I am only cooking food." One afternoon, the billionaire came again, but this time he brought something with him. He placed a sealed envelope on the wooden table. "Take this," he said quietly. "It will help you leave this place. You should not struggle like this." She looked at the envelope but did not touch it. "What is inside?" she asked. "Enough money to change your life," he replied. His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it, certainty, as if he believed help must always come dressed in wealth. She shook her head slowly. "I did not ask for my life to be changed," she said. "And I do not accept help that feels like I am being removed from myself." He frowned slightly. "You misunderstand. I am only trying to help you." She finally met his eyes. "Help should not feel like I am being lowered so someone else can feel higher." The words landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. For a moment, neither spoke. The fire beside them crackled softly, as if even it was listening to a truth being revealed too clearly to ignore. Pride stood quietly inside her, not loud, not aggressive, but firm like a tree that refuses to bend even in strong wind. She pushed the envelope back toward him. "Keep your gold," she said gently. "It may solve problems in your world, but it is not the language of mine." The billionaire's hand remained still for a moment, as if he had not expected refusal to feel so final. Around them, the market noise continued, unaware that something deeper than conversation had just taken place. Between them now stood food and wealth, not as objects, but as symbols. Her cooking spoke of truth, memory, and survival earned through honesty. His wealth represented control, distance, and a life built on power that often forgot the ground it stood on. Yet neither spoke of winning or losing, because this was not a battle of strength. It was a quiet struggle between soul and status, where what was real could not be bought, and what was bought could not always be felt. And as the fire burned steadily between them, it seemed to ask a silent question: when two truths refuse to bow, which one will the heart choose to carry? The wind that swept through the town carried more than dust that day. It carried memories long buried. The wealthy man stood alone beside his car, no longer feeling the weight of gold around him, but the heaviness of something deeper, something human. His chest rose and fell unevenly as if an unseen hand was pressing against his heart. "Why do I feel like this?" he whispered to himself. Far away, the sound of the food seller's stall echoed faintly, calling him again like a forgotten prayer. Inside him, two worlds were tearing apart, one built on pride and power, the other on truth, simplicity, and a life he had long abandoned. And for the first time, he feared not the world outside him, but the memories rising within. That night, sleep refused to come. His thoughts turned into restless spirits, dragging him back to a past he had locked away. He saw flashes of a small home, a worn-out chair, and people he once called family. His mother's voice returned like a soft drum in the dark. "A man who forgets his roots will one day forget his own name." He sat up quickly, breathing heavily. "I did not leave them because I wanted to. I left because I had to survive," he said, as if defending himself before invisible elders. But the silence around him answered with judgment. For the first time in years, regret sat beside him like an old companion he could not chase away. With the rising sun came a strange pull in his chest, as if the land itself was calling him back. He stood by the window, watching the golden light touch the earth, and felt something awaken inside him, something ancient. It was not wealth that spoke now, but memory. The smell of earth after rain, the sound of laughter from a distant village, the warmth of a life he once knew. "Why does my heart not stay still?" he asked quietly. Deep within him, ancestral voices seemed to rise, reminding him that a man without roots is like a tree waiting for the wind to decide its fate. Far from his polished world, truths were unfolding under the same sun. In the village records and forgotten whispers of elders, pieces of his identity began to surface like stones rising from deep water. The story of his birth, the struggle of his mother, and the sacrifice made to protect him, everything long hidden was slowly revealed. An elder woman spoke softly, her hands shaking as she said, "He was not abandoned. He was hidden from a war between families. His name was never meant to be lost." When the truth finally reached him through an old messenger, his world tilted. "So all this time, I was living inside a lie I never questioned," he said, his voice breaking like dry wood under fire. But not everyone received this truth with relief. The woman who had once begun to trust him stood frozen when she heard what was revealed. Her eyes did not fill with anger for his wealth or his past, but with quiet pain for the hidden truths between them. "So even your love came with shadows I could not see," she said softly, stepping back. He reached out, desperate. "I never meant to hide it from you. I was still searching for myself." But she shook her head gently. "A heart that is still searching cannot promise another heart a home." Her pain was not loud, it was deep, like a river cutting silently through stone. In the days that followed, she chose distance, not out of hatred, but out of self-respect. She walked away slowly, each step heavy but firm, like someone choosing truth over comfort. "I cannot build my life on a story that is still unfinished," she told him without looking back. He stood still, unable to follow, as if the ground itself had tied his feet. Around them, life continued, but something between them had broken into silence. No anger, no shouting, only the quiet ending of something once hoped for. And so the road between them stretched wide like two paths carved by different storms. One path pulled him toward his forgotten roots, where truth waited like an unfinished song. The other carried her forward into dignity, away from confusion and half-spoken promises. Neither path promised peace yet, but both demanded courage. As the sun set again over the dusty town, it was said that even the wind seemed to hesitate between them, as if fate itself was unsure which heart it would finally claim. Silence fell between them like a heavy cloth thrown over a burning fire. The words that once flowed easily between their hearts now struggled to find a path. The man stood alone near the edge of the village road, his eyes distant, as if chasing a truth that kept moving away from him. The girl, in her humble space, sat quietly by her cooking fire, staring into the rising smoke. Neither spoke, yet both hearts were loud with confusion. Love had not ended, but it had paused, like the earth holding its breath before rain decides to fall or pass away. Around them, the village sensed the change. People no longer laughed freely when they passed the stall. Even the wind seemed slower, as if it was listening. An old woman whispered to another, "When two hearts are bound by unseen thread, even silence becomes a language." Children stopped playing near the path where the man used to walk. It was as if fate itself had stepped into the village and was watching every movement closely, waiting to decide what would live and what would break. Inside the man's heart, a storm was rising. He stood between two worlds, one shining with polished gates, business meetings, and voices that called him sir, and another made of dust roads, simple meals, and a girl who looked at him without fear. "If I go back," he muttered to himself, "I lose them. If I stay, I lose myself." His driver called him softly, "Sir, the board is waiting. They say the land deal must be signed today." But his feet did not move. For the first time, wealth felt like a chain, not a crown. His ancestors' words echoed in his mind, "A man who forgets his roots will eat gold but never be full." Far away, pressure was tightening like ropes around his life. The world of wealth did not wait for hesitation. Calls came, voices demanding decisions, partners reminding him of reputation. "You are not just a man anymore," one elder businessman told him over the phone. "You are an empire. Do not let emotion weaken your place in history." He closed his eyes tightly. "Is this strength, or is it prison?" he whispered. The chains of gold were invisible, but heavier than iron, pulling him back toward a life where feelings had no place. From every corner of society, eyes were now fixed on him. People who once admired him began to question his silence. "Why is he seen near that stall again?" they asked. A man of his status should not walk where the poor gather. Rumors began to grow like dry grass catching fire. In high offices, whispers turned into concern. "He must return to order," they said. "He is forgetting the rules of the powerful." Yet no one saw the war inside him, the battle between a life built by expectation and a truth slowly waking in his heart. But where power could not fully reach, pride began to act. Those who feared losing control saw the girl as a threat, not because she had done harm, but because she had unknowingly touched something money could not buy. Quiet plans were made in hidden rooms. "We cannot allow distractions to weaken him," one voice said coldly. "Remove the influence before it spreads." It was not open war, but something more dangerous. Silent moves, careful words, and unseen pressure designed to break what they could not understand. That same night, shadows fell upon the humble stall. Men in dark clothing appeared, their voices firm but controlled. "You are warned," one of them said to the girl. "Stay away from him. People like you do not belong in his world." Her hands trembled, but she stood straight, refusing to bow. "I do not seek his world," she replied softly. "I only serve food made with truth." The man stepped closer. "Truth does not matter in his world. Only power does." As they left, the fire beside her stall flickered violently, as if even the flames had felt the threat. And in that moment, a new danger entered the story, one that would test not only love, but survival itself. When truth is pure but stands alone, it is often attacked by the noise of power. After the warning at the stall, whispers spread like dry leaves in harmattan wind. People who had never spoken to the girl began to question her name, her character, even her intentions. "They say she is reaching beyond her place," one merchant murmured. "A man like him cannot be tied to such simplicity," another added. Yet the girl only stood by her fire, serving food with trembling hands but steady eyes. She knew lies travel faster than truth in a restless town, but she also knew truth, though slow, carries the weight of ancestors. Soon, pressure fell upon her like a heavy sky. Customers stopped coming. Supplies became harder to get. Even familiar faces avoided her gaze. One afternoon, a man she once trusted spoke harshly, "You should step away before this shame follows your family." Her lips parted, but no words came out. That night, she sat alone beside her dying fire. "Have I become a burden to my own people?" she whispered. The fire crackled weakly, as if answering, "Even the strongest tree bends when storms speak together." For the first time, doubt entered her heart, not as a visitor, but as a weight. By dawn, her hands moved slower. The sacred recipes passed down through mothers and grandmothers felt heavier than before, as if even the ancestors were watching her struggle. "Maybe I should stop," she said softly to herself. "Maybe this path was never meant for me." But her eyes fell on the wooden stall, worn by years of use, carrying scratches of memory and sacrifice. It was more than a workplace, it was a living story. A place where her mother once stood, and her grandmother before her. To leave it felt like tearing pages from a sacred book still being written. That stall was not just wood and nails. It was heritage. It stood as a witness to generations of women who fed families through hardship, who turned fire and grain into survival. Now it stood at the edge of silence, threatened not just by lack of business, but by shame and pressure. A neighbor looked at it and said quietly, "When a stall falls, a story disappears with it." The girl placed her hand on it and felt something deeper than wood. She felt memory. And memory, she knew, does not die easily, even when the world tries to bury it. Far away in the silent world of wealth, the man lay awake in his grand room. Everything around him was perfect: polished floors, expensive lights, servants moving without sound, yet his heart felt empty. He turned in his bed but found no rest. "Why does silence hurt more than noise?" he asked himself. The house answered only with emptiness. Even wealth felt distant tonight, like a language he could no longer understand. Outside, the night stretched endlessly, as if holding secrets it refused to share. And within him, something unfamiliar began to stir, regret, soft but persistent, like rain waiting for permission to fall. As sleep finally came, the past rose like smoke from forgotten fire. He saw himself not as a wealthy man, but as a boy running barefoot through red earth. A voice called him, soft, familiar, filled with warmth. "Come back before the sun forgets your name," his mother said in the dream. She stood near an old cooking fire, stirring a pot with gentle hands. "You were not born for emptiness," she told him. "A man who forgets love will one day mistake gold for life." He reached for her, but she faded like mist. "Mother!" he called out, but only wind answered. Yet her words remained, echoing inside him like ancestral drums refusing to be silenced. He woke suddenly, breath uneven, eyes wide in the dark. For the first time in years, tears formed without permission. "What have I become?" he whispered. The walls of his wealth no longer felt strong. They felt like mirrors showing him everything he had avoided. The memory of his mother's voice did not fade. It grew louder in his heart. It was no longer just a dream. It was a calling. Slowly, painfully, he began to understand that the life he had built outside was strong, but the life he had lost inside was calling him home. And in that quiet awakening, truth revealed itself without ceremony. Gold could build kingdoms, but it could not build peace. Wealth could command people, but it could not command memory. Love, once abandoned, always returns, not as comfort, but as question. And in the stillness of the night, the man finally saw what he had refused to see for so long, that an empty heart dressed in gold is still empty, no matter how brightly it shines. The night after the dream did not leave him in peace. It followed him like a living shadow, whispering through every corner of his mind. The man stood before his window, but this time the city lights did not call to him. Instead, he felt something deeper pulling at his chest, a voice older than wealth, older than pride. "You cannot outrun what is written in your blood," he murmured. It was as if the ancestors themselves were speaking through the wind, reminding him of a path he once abandoned. Without fully understanding why, he found himself stepping away from comfort and toward the road that led back to where it all began. He walked as a man stripped of illusion, no longer carrying the weight of titles or status in his heart. Each step felt like shedding layers of pride. "If I am truly lost," he said softly, "then let truth be my guide, not gold." In his mind, he saw the girl's face, not as a symbol of poverty or simplicity, but as someone grounded in something he had forgotten: honesty. For the first time, he did not want to be seen as powerful. He wanted to be real. And in that quiet decision, something inside him was reborn, not as a wealthy man, but as a man searching for meaning. As he moved closer to the stall, the world around him began to change. People noticed. Whispers followed him like dust in the wind. "Is that not the man of gold?" someone asked. "Why does he walk like one of us now?" another voice replied. Yet he did not stop. The storm of judgment around him grew louder, but within him, a different voice grew stronger. "Let them watch," he thought. "Let them judge. I have lived long enough in their approval." Each step forward was a step against the storm of expectation that had ruled his life for years. By the time he reached the familiar ground, a small crowd had gathered. It was not planned, but fate had arranged it so. Elders, traders, women, and young men all stood in silence, sensing that something important was about to happen. Even the air felt heavier, as if the land itself was watching. An elder whispered, "When a man returns to his truth, even the earth pauses to listen." No one moved. No one spoke loudly. It was not just a gathering of people. It was a gathering of witnesses to a turning point that could not be undone. Then, before them all, he stopped. The man who once commanded rooms of power now stood in front of a simple stall, his head slightly bowed. "I have come not as a master," he said clearly, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "but as a man who has learned the value of humility." A silence fell instantly. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "I once believed my name and wealth made me greater than this place," he continued, "but I was wrong." His words broke through the air like thunder without sound. "I reject the chains of status that blinded me." He turned toward the girl and spoke again, softer this time. "I bring no gold to buy your worth, no power to define your place. I bring only truth." Slowly, he stepped closer to the stall. "This fire you keep alive," he said, "is not just cooking food. It is memory, it is strength, it is heritage. You carry what many like me have forgotten." The girl looked at him, stunned, her hands trembling slightly. She did not know whether to speak or remain silent. Around them, the crowd remained frozen, watching a moment they did not expect to see in their lifetime. Then, something shifted quietly between two worlds. The man of wealth lowered his gaze, not in defeat, but in respect. "Today, I bow not to you as a poor woman," he said, "but as a keeper of truth." It was not gold that crossed the distance between them, but understanding. The invisible wall that had stood between power and humility began to crack, not with force, but with honesty. Even those watching felt something inside them soften, as if an old belief was breaking apart quietly in their hearts. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence was no longer empty, it was full. Full of shock, full of emotion, full of awakening. The girl finally exhaled, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then you have finally arrived," she said. And in that moment, the world did not end or change loudly. It simply began again, differently, as if destiny itself had turned a new page without making a sound. A great stillness fell after the storm of change. It was not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of healing. The man who once walked in pride now stood with a softer heart, as if the weight of unseen chains had finally fallen from him. "I did not lose myself," he said quietly. "I have finally found what I buried long ago." Around him, the air felt lighter, as if the land itself was breathing again. What had once been a collision of worlds was now the beginning of understanding, where pride had fallen and humanity had risen in its place. In the village, life slowly began to return to its natural rhythm. People no longer spoke in whispers of fear or confusion. The wind that once carried tension now moved gently through the streets. Children played again near the dusty paths, and elders sat outside their homes with calmer faces. One old man said, "When the storm passes, even broken trees learn to stand again." The village was not fully healed, but it was no longer broken. Balance, like a forgotten song, was slowly returning to the hearts of the people. The girl who once stood alone at her stall now stood with renewed strength. Her eyes no longer carried doubt, but quiet dignity. "They tried to bury my name in shame," she said softly to a customer, "but roots do not die because of wind." Her stall, once surrounded by judgment, now became a place of quiet respect. People who once turned away now came forward, not just for food, but for the warmth of her spirit. "You stood when others wanted you to fall," an elder woman told her. "That is not weakness, that is legacy." With time, her dignity grew stronger than the hardships she had endured. The same voices that once mocked her now spoke her name with honor. "She is not just a food seller," one man admitted, lowering his head. "She carries the strength of her mothers." Even those who once doubted her began to see what had always been there, resilience wrapped in humility. In the market, her presence was no longer questioned. It was respected, as if the village had finally learned a lesson it once ignored. Her stall, standing firm under the open sky, became more than wood and fire. It became a symbol. People said, "That fire never died because it was fed by truth." Each flame that rose from her cooking pot seemed to carry stories of generations before her. Mothers who endured, women who survived, families held together by quiet strength. Even the wind that passed through it seemed to bow slightly, as if acknowledging something sacred. The stall was no longer just a place of survival, it was a place of heritage. Far from the noise of judgment, the man walked back toward where he once belonged, not the world of wealth, but the world of memory and truth. "I have carried gold for too long," he said to himself, "and forgotten the weight of my own roots." Each step home felt lighter, yet heavier with meaning. The people who once followed his power now watched him differently, not as a man of status, but as one returning to himself. And for the first time, he did not walk ahead of his people, but among them. When he reached the place of his origin, he no longer brought pride as a shield. Instead, he stood before his roots with humility. "I choose to return not as a master," he said, "but as a son of this land." Gold was no longer his identity, it was something he set aside, like a garment no longer needed. The elders nodded slowly. "A man becomes truly rich," one said, "when he learns what not to carry." Old wounds did not disappear, but they began to soften. Families that once carried silence between them now spoke again, carefully but honestly. He sat with those he had once left behind, listening more than speaking. "We do not need your gold," his relative told him, "we need your presence." And in that moment, something long broken inside him began to repair, not through wealth, but through belonging. The ancestors, it seemed, were finally at peace. Between him and the girl, something new was born, something free of chains. "I do not want a love that buys my silence," she said gently. He nodded. "And I do not want a life that forgets truth." Their bond was no longer built on confusion or hidden pain, but on honesty and respect. Two hearts that once stood apart now understood each other without fear. It was not possession, it was partnership. And so, slowly, the two worlds that once clashed began to merge, not by force, but by understanding. Tradition and modern life did not destroy each other, they learned to walk side by side. The village still carried its dust, and the man still carried his past, but now both were shaped by wisdom. As the sun set once more over the land, it was said that even the wind smiled, because harmony, once lost, had finally found its way home. The village that once whispered with doubt and sharp tongues now stood in softer silence, as if the wind itself had learned to speak gently. People who once judged the humble food seller now lowered their eyes with respect when they passed her stall. An elder was heard saying, "The river is never small because the ocean ignores it." We were blind to her worth. Even the children smiled at her now, no longer repeating the cruel words of their parents. In that quiet shift, acceptance slowly grew where judgment had once taken root like thorny bushes in dry land. But not all hearts escaped the weight of their deeds. Those who used pride and influence to harm others began to feel the quiet hand of consequence. Business alliances faded, promises broke like dry wood, and reputations once loud like drums now grew faint. A powerful man who once mocked humility sat alone in his grand house, his wealth unable to buy peace. An elder murmured, "The earth remembers every step, even those who walk as kings." And so justice arrived, not with noise, but with the patient truth of time. As the story of what had happened spread beyond the village, it traveled like a warm wind across distant lands. Traders spoke of it in markets, mothers shared it with their children, and travelers carried it like wisdom in their hearts. "Remember the man who forgot his roots," they would say, "and the woman who fed truth with her hands." It became more than gossip, it became lesson. A reminder that life does not bow to pride forever, and that every action returns to its maker like rain returning to the soil. The small food stall, once seen as ordinary and unimportant, was no longer just a place to eat. It became a living symbol of endurance and love. People came not only for meals, but to feel the spirit of what had grown there: strength born from struggle, dignity shaped by hardship, and love served in simple bowls. The woman who ran it worked with calm pride, knowing her craft carried the voices of generations. As one visitor whispered, "This place feeds more than hunger, it feeds the soul." The man who once walked with heavy pride was no longer defined by gold or status. In his quiet return to humility, people began to see him differently, not as a distant figure of wealth, but as a human being who had finally learned to listen. He walked among them without the weight of arrogance, greeting elders and honoring simple work. Someone once said, "He is no longer made of stone, but of breath and understanding." And so his name softened in the mouths of the people. Where pride once stood like a tall wall, love now grew like green vines finding sunlight. The village that once divided them now watched as connection replaced distance, and understanding replaced fear. Even those who doubted felt something shift in their hearts, as if the land itself had forgiven what once was broken. It became clear to all that change had not come from wealth or power, but from truth finally allowed to breathe. And so the final wisdom settled among the people like evening dust over quiet earth: true riches do not sleep in gold, but in roots that hold us when storms come. The story of a single meal had become a lesson for many, showing that even the hardest heart can be awakened by simple love served without pride.